Hey sports fans, Coach Nick here, and welcome to B-Ball Breakdown and another episode of the Starting Five with Ben Heisler. We are focusing on free agency. July 1st, it's happening. It's all going down. Ben, what's happening on your end of the world?
Well, in my end of the world, Coach, I'm following the same stories as you are, and we got a lot to dive into on the show today. I think we'll start by talking about guys that still haven't signed yet. We're, of course, recording this on July 1st, so maybe some bold predictions there. And then in the final half of the show, we'll focus in on guys that have signed and maybe the implications and some bold predictions on what that ultimately means for their teams moving forward. So let's start with LaMarcus Aldridge, obviously the #1 name surrounding free agency this year. Met with the Lakers yesterday, a very, very productive meeting according to multiple reports, but he's still taking meetings, also according to reports, with the Spurs and the Raptors and possibly the Mavericks as well. They all remain in play. So if we have to start with bold prediction #1 when it comes to LaMarcus Aldridge, where would you say he ends up?
Well, I think it's fair enough to say he's not going back to Portland. That's what it looks like. So I don't see him with the Lakers. I feel like he's had a lot of taste of success recently with the playoffs in Portland, so he's not going to go to a team like that. I don't know. We could go bold and say that the Spurs are going to pull something crazy off and get him in there. They'd have to do some reshuffling, but why not? Let's go. I'll go bold and go Spurs.
Yeah, you know what? I was really leaning towards the Lakers for a while. I still think at this moment I'm probably going to lean towards them. But you got to love the fit for the Spurs because it's a winning culture, because he knows the state of Texas, obviously played his college ball over at UT. And just if they can make it work financially, it makes a lot of sense. But from all reports that I've been hearing, Coach, and again, it could be a lot of speculation, is that the meeting with LA went really, really well, and they have the cap space to be able to make something special possibly happen in the next couple of years.
Well, let me make one thing clear. All those meetings always go really well. Okay, unless Kobe is sitting in and Dwight Howard is the other guy on the other end of the table.
Sure.
So those meetings all go well. He'll have a great meeting in every other city he goes to as well.
I think that's a fair point. But there's something about that's sticking to me right now about the Lakers. So I guess that'll make that my bold prediction, even though that's where some of the reports are saying. Spurs, I think, a little bit more of a bolder prediction. We'll see what happens. Kevin Love, another big name, big guy on the free agency list. Most reports, Coach, indicate that he's going to stay with Cleveland, but he's also meeting with the Lakers as well. I think the strong bet is to predict that he goes to Cleveland. But do you think that maybe the Lakers or another team has a chance for Kevin Love?
I do. I'm not so sold on how it worked last year, and in a way that he probably feels like he wasn't used up to the best of his abilities. He might have been looking at how LeBron controls the team and realize, you know what, it's never going to change because he doesn't get those elbow touches that make him so effective.
Right.
He's got his ring now. So I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up, coming back home sort of to UCLA territory with the Lakers and come back.
I think he ends up with the Lakers as well, particularly if it's on that one-year deal. Because, again, even though – well, no, let me rephrase that. I think if the one-year deal option makes sense for Kevin Love, if he's comfortable with that option, then, yes, I think he goes back to Cleveland and give it one more shot. But if he's looking for that max deal or as much of a max deal as he can get and the Lakers are willing to give it to him, I think he enjoys the idea of being more of a focal point of the offense, being able, as you said, to get more of those elbow touches, some more outside shots, be able to use his game a little bit more effectively than what he did in Cleveland. 1 year, he has an opportunity to try and win that ring, and especially with LeBron and the rest of the team retooling and getting ready to get themselves back for another deep postseason run, that's certainly very appealing. But long-term, if he thinks the Lakers and Mitch Kupchak are on the right track, then I think he ends up in LA.
With his injury history, I'd be surprised if he didn't take as long of a deal as he possibly could sign.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point as well. To another guy, another big that's possibly looking to stay out in the West Coast, that's DeAndre Jordan, Coach. And we talk about Kevin Love, a guy that's dealt with injuries throughout his whole career. DeAndre Jordan's pretty much been an Iron Man. Meeting with both LA teams, Dallas could be a possibility. Same with the New York Knicks, although I wouldn't touch that with really anything right now. DeAndre Jordan, if you're making that bold prediction, where do you think he goes?
I don't know. Those rumors have been swirling around LA for a week or so now about how perhaps he wasn't as happy as we thought in LA, and the notion of him playing really well during that stretch when Blake Griffin was out gave him a little bit of a taste of what he could do if he was on a different team. So I don't know. It would really send shockwaves across the league because the big three, the Clippers, are kind of unrivaled, I feel like. Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan are a fantastic three that most teams do not want to have to deal with. And if he leaves that really causes a ripple effect on a lot of different things. So I don't know. Sometimes when those rumors start up, you start to think that there's a lot of truth to it. Again, I would not be surprised to see him go home.
Yeah, I think the Clippers obviously make the most amount of sense because they really tailor their style of basketball to his abilities. You have the ability in one of the best point guards in the league, and Chris Paul, to be able to get him the basketball in the area of space that he's able to play most effectively. You're still talking about a really good window to try and compete for a championship. And then if you go over to the Lakers, yeah, you might get a little bit more cash, or whether or not that's even a possibility, I'm not so sure. I think he stays in LA, but I was thinking about it from this perspective. What about a team like Minnesota? I know they just got Karl Anthony Towns, and maybe they'd want to spend that kind of money, but you have Towns who can play both the offensive and the defensive side. What if Minnesota came calling along and said, this is a guy, an elite defensive player that can guard the rim, help Towns play out on the outside? Do you think that could possibly be a fit? He's not going to go there, but I really like that idea.
I guess. I mean, obviously my first instinct would be like, well, they already have their sort of franchise center, and then you bring another guy in at a high price, and they're going to want to play a lot too. And now you're going to ask Anthony Towns to play more power forward, which
but I think
who knows?
It's a more natural position, though.
I mean, I guess it is. You're right. I mean, he didn't play it that way in college much, but listen, I'm all in on Karl Anthony Towns as well. So, that would be fun, in a league that seems to be going smaller and smaller. I keep hearing all these kind of suggestions about having, two bigs going, like Willie Cauley-Stein and Boogie Cousins together. Sure. So, yeah. I'm in. I wouldn't mind seeing that.
Yeah, occasionally go bold or go home. All right, so we talked about three of the biggest guys still left on the market. Let's talk about three guys that have signed and signed up long-term, starting with Anthony Davis. Coach, 5 years, $145 million. That extension is going to kick in starting in 2016 after his rookie deal is up. It's basically in line with when the cap number just goes sky high. And then that'll make him the highest paid player in the league after Kobe, I think, had that $136 million deal. Mm-hmm. I look at that deal for Davis, and you think, well, certainly he deserves at this point to be the highest paid player based on his ability and his skill set and where you see him developing. But do you think maybe in the next 5 years that Davis will remain the highest paid player in the league?
Probably not, because we have guys like Durant coming up if he gets back and healthy, and LeBron again. Actually, we got to see what kind. He's only going to sign we got to look at what LeBron's deal is going to be, because he'll probably be a little bit on the older side when he signs another deal. But there might be, I would think if Durant is healthy and his deal comes up, he could eclipse that.
Yeah, I think Durant might be able to get to that level too, especially with his MVP. With LeBron, it's really interesting because you saw the type of money. I'll use Jordan in this example, not comparing the two, but I'm saying in this example. The amount of money that Jordan was getting at the tail end of his career was way over nearly everybody else, and it wasn't even close. We're talking about like 25, 26, 27, $28 million deals for Michael at the tail end of his career. If Cleveland in that final year after the cap number really goes up to the top want to say, okay, this is our opportunity to lock in LeBron and not have any worries or any hesitations that he's going to go anywhere, maybe they say, we'll make you the highest player in the league and we'll move on. Right.
But remember, Michael actually got north of 30, I think closer to 35, but that was only because he was so underpaid for most of his career, not even the highest paid player in the Bulls. But he was an honorable guy that didn't sit out, and he honored his contract. And it helps when you're getting $100 million from Nike at that time as well. But the Anthony Davis deal is great, and for a lot of reasons, because there's a lot of income that comes into New Orleans that is ancillary, that people want to come to see him and buy his jerseys. Yeah. And that also yields a higher television revenue from them locally. So there's a lot of money that the team can make that you don't necessarily see from like the box office gate. That makes Anthony Davis that valuable for that many years.
Next up on the starting five, as we continue after we talked about guys that are still on the market, but guys that have signed long-term and sort of the implications they could have, is Kawhi Leonard. He gets a max deal at 5 years, $90 million to remain in San Antonio. Obviously, they think that this guy's going to be an absolute star. He took over in the finals a couple seasons ago and still one of the better players in the game. Do we look at Kawhi's deal at 5 and 90, considering that he signed the max deal before the numbers go up, and maybe we look at this deal at a couple years as one of the biggest steals of the 2015 free agency period?
Well, we shall see if he has, hit his ceiling or not. I think that there is some still room to improve, but I mean, it's a nice deal. Everyone probably would be relatively happy on July 1st, 2015, but you're right. I think as we move forward and the money kicks in, you're going to see that there will probably, there will be players that would be perceived not as good as him being paid more for their services. So, yeah, I think it's a nice deal. I think, they both should be happy, but I think the Spurs in the long run will end up benefiting from a little extra cost saving on that.
I think so, too, especially if it means whether they're in play for LaMarcus Aldridge, whether or not they can sort of move some numbers around in that category as well. I think it's a really nice deal for San Antonio. Just the more consistency that team continues to have, again, we'll see how long Popovich really ends up sticking around for and how long they can continue to move around with some of those other veterans and Parker and Duncan and how they can continue to build with this team moving forward. But that Kawhi is going to be there, and that's a level of consistency that I think both their fans and their organization can feel very comfortable with. And then finally, Coach, Goran Dragic, this actually happened just moments ago as we started to tape this episode. 5 years, $90 million. Even though that's the same max deal as Kawhi Leonard's, it's actually below max money for Dragic, which allows potential room for the Heat to continue to make that one-year offer to Dwayne Wade to that max deal to sort of sneak in. I don't want to talk necessarily about the value of the deal for Dragic because I think it's a very solid move for Miami, especially him not taking the max deal. But you think this deal and a lot of the other moves and a lot of the pieces that they have on this team, does it allow Miami to possibly sneak into the top half of the Eastern Conference?
I think absolutely. I think the only thing that held them back last year was injuries. So if you have a healthy starting five of Dragic, Wade, Bosh, Deng, and Hassan Whiteside, who for everyone looking at it,
he's really good.
Yeah, it's a really good starting five. Now they have some other guys on the bench that would be very helpful that they might have to move around to get the money to work out. But in a weaker Eastern Conference, that gets them, just behind Cleveland, maybe. It maybe vaults them ahead of Chicago. So I think that that's a really solid team that Pat Riley had put together. And unfortunately, we didn't see it last year because of Bosh's heart issues and Mick Roberts. But man, if they come back, big if, they are going to be primed to be competing for the conference finals.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, especially with that starting five. I'll be curious to see how their bench ultimately ends up playing a role for them. But yeah, as we saw in Cleveland, it didn't necessarily play that big of a role as we initially anticipated, especially in the second half of the season. Right now, you're looking at the Eastern Conference with, let's say, Miami's as good as we think they are. Then you have the Bulls, you have Cleveland. The Pacers, I think, will be back in that conversation again with a healthy Paul George. Atlanta, a lot of it depends on who they sign and who they're able to bring back. And then Washington. So you got some pretty strong teams now at the top of the Eastern Conference that could make a play here.
Right. Although the Bulls are starting over with a new coach. They just signed Dunleavy to a decent deal, which is not going to be that much in the long run.
14.4 for Dunleavy.
Yeah, so that's a decent value. I mean, I think he's okay. I'm not sure. Obviously, his better days are behind him, but he's a nice glue guy, the kind of guy you want as your fifth starter on a good playoff team. But Pau Gasol doesn't really fit in what Hoiberg is going to want to do, I don't think. And so that might be a move that somebody tries and gets, for Pau Gasol, which would also shake up the landscape as well, because Pau Gasol going to certain teams can really change stuff.
And you know what? If they were going to try and move Gasol as well, talk about selling high on a guy. It's kind of for a couple of rough years with the Lakers. He goes and has a terrific season in Chicago. I'd be very surprised if they ended up making that move, but that's another bold prediction from you, Coach. That's why I like working with you.
Hey, that's how we roll. Well, I think that's all we got covered for today.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe we'll find out if the Bulls end up making that max deal for Jimmy Butler. And the more we continue to find out about all these different free agency signings, Coach, we'll keep them informed right here on the Starting Five. Absolutely. And don't forget, sports fans, at B-Ball Breakdown, we're not a channel. We're a conversation. You win? You win, Ben? I'm always in, Coach.